facilitating our program tonight. So go for it, Marianne.
I think
Can't hear you, Marianne.
I know, I realized I was muted. Thanks, and thanks for everybody being here. This is a good turnout. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Sarah. She is a founder of Strategic Nature LLC, a consultant, an educator, and mindfulness teacher with 20 years of project management and program development experience. Sarah has a master's degree in watershed science and management and a bachelor's degree in fish and wildlife conservation from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Over the years, Sarah's planned for, studied, taught about, and managed urban trees in natural areas in multiple cities, including Tacoma, Washington, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Sarah has experience in federal and municipal government, nonprofit organizations, and the private sector. This includes establishing the Philadelphia Urban Field Station with the USDA Forest Service in 2011 and founding the Tacoma Tree Foundation in 2018. Sarah uses her experience to help individuals and organizations make meaningful changes that lead to big improvements, particularly around environmental goals. Sarah combines a love of trees and nature with her professional background in urban ecosystem management. She's been studying trees since she noticed ants on a favorite flowering dogwood when she was 10. Her curiosity for trees and nature led her to pursue a career focused on urban ecosystem health and sustainability. All along the way, she's found relief, healing, connection, and joy outdoors. Sarah provides educational talks, leads mindfulness walks, and helps to connect people to nature and to each other. It's very impressive, Sarah. So let's get started. I'll just ask everybody, if you do have questions, if we can just save it till after Sarah's done speaking, that'd be great. So Sarah, let's start with my first question. What do people need to know about tree protection?
Thank you for having me, and excited to talk about this. It's kind of a big question, right? What do people need to know about tree protection? And I thought maybe I'd share a little bit of my perspective on that, on just trees, like the word trees, and that we think sometimes when we're protecting trees, we're protecting like a tree. And having come from a watershed background, I do think kind of on a landscape scale. And even a tree that is like on a block with no other trees, to me, the way I think about it, it's like it's still part of a forest. It's still connected to other trees. And and if I was like a bird, if we took a bird's perspective and we imagined what it's like for a bird to move through a landscape, even if a tree is far away, that tree is still important to the bird in getting to its next stop, to its next set of resources and that sort of thing. So I think when I think about tree protection, that maybe we can even expand out and think of it a little bit more holistically, of every tree is part of kind of a network of trees. And then that kind of helps us think a little bit about if a tree is part of this network of trees, what is the role of that tree in this network? Or like, what's the function? What is the need that that we're looking for? Like in forestry, think of like the desired outcome. So if we're keeping a tree or not keeping a tree, what is the desired outcome of that? It becomes a lot easier to make those choices when we think, oh, this is the only tree on the block. If we lose this tree, we're going to lose all this shade. We're going to lose all this beauty, all this oxygen, however you think about it. So I kind of think about that in terms of just kind of framing it a little bit, I guess. The trees are part of this larger network. And then I think also it's important to think about whether you're thinking about an urban forest or a suburban forest or even a rural environment. These trees within this network of a forest of some sort are managed by individuals often. In some cases, we have like a larger area that's managed by one owner or manager. But often these resources are divided among many, 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 many people. And those many people are making choices about, maybe for them, it's just the one tree on their house. But it might impact the whole block if that's the only tree on the block. So when we're thinking about tree protection, it's sort of thinking about who are the stakeholders who are part of this tree protection that we're interested in, and how is the resource that they're managing, in this case, maybe it's a tree, how is that resource being managed, and do they have kind of the wherewithal to make choices about whether the tree is safe or not safe. And I think that's the other thing to think about with tree protection, that sometimes trees need to be cut down. Sometimes trees are hazardous. Sometimes trees are problematic. But making that choice is something that can be really difficult. I was, some people often will comment on a tree that's leaning. If you're familiar with madrones, you see they lean so much, right? And for some people, there's some worry, oh, the tree's leaning, it's going to fall. And actually, if we look at science, the research that, arboriculture is pretty young when it comes to science, but it's starting to catch up. People are starting to study these like practical questions that make a really big difference in the management of trees. And one researcher has spent his entire career basically studying the movement of trees and the likelihood of them failing or falling down, and found that there's like very little evidence that just because a tree is leaning, that it's more likely to fall down. That's not one of the factors that is really important. Doesn't mean that a tree is leaning, it won't fall down. It's just that the leaning is not the motivating kind of factor in the falling down.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, that's perfect. So I guess leading in from that, why do trees matter? Why do they matter? Why do we need to have them? Right? Why are they
Yeah.
so important?
Yeah. I think there's like a list, that people think of right away. I like to ask this question a lot in programs that I do, and usually somebody will say right away, oh, they provide oxygen. That's great. Awesome. We can take a breath and know that we're actually benefiting from some kind of green organism right now. Then I'm almost always have somebody say that they're beautiful. Trees are aesthetic, beautiful, make you feel better. So the mental restoration of that, they reduce stormwater, and they reduce heat. People usually mention shade. And then this list can get really long. Wildlife benefits, pollinator benefits. It just kind of like, you name it. You're thinking of something I didn't say. There's maybe another couple that are out there that I didn't say out loud. So they're all really important benefits of trees and all reasons trees matter. But I've also been kind of playing with this idea of, and it's a little depressing, but what does it mean to have no trees? Like, what if we don't have any trees? What does that mean? And then it starts being like, well, actually, why do trees matter if you have no trees? What is the loss of the tree? What are we losing when we lose all the trees? And it means that it's hotter, not just like conveniently cooler, that trees are conveniently shading us. It's that the whole earth becomes hotter, sorry, and drier. And then when we have those conditions, just hotter and drier, we start seeing differences in climate. We start seeing like plants aren't growing. So it becomes this negative feedback loop, right? The trees are gone, no plants are growing, everything gets drier, and then you start seeing famine, and this is bad news, And I think it's overwhelming kind of to think about that. But I think when we lose, like if you see one tree, maybe some of you have had this experience before, you see a tree get cut down that didn't need to be cut down, perfectly nice tree, perfectly healthy, mature tree that's doing all that good stuff, providing the shade, and it might feel like that's one step closer to this like scary, inevitable situation, not inevitable, sorry, scary situation that could happen down the road. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess why do trees matter? I mean, trees are life, I think. Trees are with water, they are part of the water cycle. And I don't think in the same ways that everything in our body is actually connected. Things don't work without each other. Trees and water don't really work without each other. So, yeah, I think that's why trees are life. I think maybe I'll just start get a tattoo of that.
Actually, that's a good one. Trees are life. So I've heard of tree inequality. What does equity have to do with trees?
It's such a deep subject, and we could spend the entire time today and then keep talking about how trees are connected to equity. I think some of the things that are really important to know and acknowledge are that the tree canopies that we have in most cities in the United States are, especially in urban areas, are deeply impacted by policies that were motivated by racism and all sorts of exclusionary acts, and that did change the landscape and change the experience that people had in neighborhoods much deeper than trees, right? It's like trees are part of it, but they're like very what they end up being is kind of an indicator, right? That of past policies. So in places with lower socioeconomic that have low socioeconomic value, lower socioeconomic realities, I guess, conditions, you see fewer trees, generally speaking. And it's not even generally speaking, it shows up over and over and over again, city after city, this same kind of condition. And then you can overlap that with things like exposure to lead or other risk factors, cancer. There's a great map that the Washington State, I think it is, I want to say it's Department of Ecology puts together this really great health disparities map, and you can kind of see where the health disparities are, and things like increased cancer risks and stuff like that, increased exposure to diesel fuels, and they're all kind of part and parcel with lack of tree canopy or low tree canopy. And it's not like the tree canopy is not it's not a causal factor in the exposure to cancer or something, or cancer causing agents. But it comes with the package, so and like I said, it kind of ends up being like an indicator of what's happening within a city or a suburb, and how trees are cared for sometimes reflects how we're caring for people. So I think that's an important thing too to keep in mind. And I think just generally oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Finish your
I was
thought.
just going to sort of like also say that when we think about planting trees, I think then it becomes really important to bring that idea forward of how does planting trees become part of caring for people and caring for the landscape that has perhaps been really damaged or harmed. And so like, how can it be an act of kind of repair?
So what are the biggest issues then that are facing trees in suburban and urban areas, especially cities? I mean, so what are those biggest issues?
I mean, a huge issue really is development, and I don't mean to like throw developers under the bus or anything here. It's just sort of the practicality of construction generally often comes with a removal of trees, and sometimes that's inevitable, but sometimes that's avoidable. And I think that's the thing, is like the avoidable part is the opportunity for pushing. Those are the places where we can make choices as communities, as those are places that we as advocates can kind of push to make change, so that the tree doesn't get cut down just because it's easier for them to move equipment around, or it doesn't get cut down because of some idea that it looks better if it's without trees, which isn't like, doesn't show up in like science. It's like, if you have trees, you have higher housing prices and things like that. So the trees, science says that the research shows that the trees are actually supporting that kind of economic growth. But yeah, I guess that's
So what are the challenges? So my real concern I have are our large trees, or our legacy trees, our biggest trees. What are the challenges that are facing these? I mean, what's the biggest? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for bringing me back. I was sort of like moving down the housing issue a little bit, which is complicated. But yeah, these large trees, they're also impacted by just the stress of living in urban conditions. And to circle back to the, why do trees matter? These changing conditions that we're all experiencing are impacting trees, and we're seeing that impact in trees. We're seeing things like sooty bark disease show up with big leaf maples, which that has been around. It's not a new thing. It's just that the conditions have changed, and those trees are now being impacted by the sooty bark disease, kind of making a much better impact than it had before. So I think our larger trees are also facing a lot of stress, as are the newly planted trees. I mean, this is I think, kind of goes back to your previous question too.
So
And also people are just afraid. Sometimes people are afraid of trees, of these bigger
yeah.
trees. Yeah, but it sounded like you had like you were gonna add something.
You're right. There is this fear, and if you look at statistics, these big trees, I don't know. Now, I read that the chance of getting hit by lightning is greater than being struck by a tree that falls on you. But anyway, so how do we as individuals help to protect trees? I mean, what do we do, since that's important?
Yeah. I think a few things that I would recommend is getting to know your local rules about trees and tree removals, and understanding what is even the policy around it. Are people expected to have permits? Is there any sort of inspection? Are arborists involved? Or is this kind of a Wild West situation where people can make whatever choices they want about community trees? I think it's important to know, and also important to know, actually, Vivian and I were talking to somebody the other day who had this issue that was like, there was new rules, and also they had a tree that was interfering with sidewalk, and it was just sort of this complicated thing. And they were like, if I do this action, will I get fined? Or if I do this action, will I get fined? They felt very much between a rock and a hard place. And I think when you don't really understand how the rules will play out, sometimes even the people who created the policies don't know how things are going to play out. And so I think it's important for community members to come back to their policymakers, to their council members, and share, what the experiences are, and try to improve those rules, and put a little pressure on people to actually understand that the way that the rules are written in local municipalities and local communities makes a difference on the ground. And I think it also comes down to like, oh, go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, finish your thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes we see things happen. It's a small choice that's being made, is having this big impact. So, I mean, I'll just give you an example. In Philadelphia, I found in some neighborhoods, trees had just been cut down. Like the way the inspector was doing the inspections, for convenience sake, he was going down a block and just walking down and tagging every tree that was hazardous or potentially problematic. Which none of that all made sense, but he wasn't going back. This particular person wasn't going back and asking people on that block if they wanted a new tree planted. And that's the way that program worked. When the tree was cut down, the owner could opt in for a new tree. But people didn't know that they had that option, because in that particular situation, one person made a particular choice not to ask that follow-up question. And sometimes, like locally, I think we have, say, a building built, and the developer's required to plant trees for that situation in a given municipality. But if there isn't an inspector to make sure that those trees survived the year or 2 years or whatever the expectation is, then they might just sort of sit there dead, which I see a lot. I see a lot of trees that are kind of standing dead because there was not the follow-up inspection. And that's not necessarily a difficult thing. Like a little pressure does make a big difference in that situation.
But so on that topic, so tree replacement, especially with our changing climate, we're getting kind of hotter and drier. do they really compensate for the loss of our larger trees? Like, for example, clear cutting for development, like a forested parcel, and then replanting with smaller trees. How does that, can that even compensate for the
Yeah,
loss of those larger trees?
right. Like the math isn't there. The math doesn't support, it the larger tree is going to have more ecosystem benefits. One large tree is going to have more ecosystem benefits than a young tree. And like you alluded to, a lot of times what we see is that the one big tree gets cut and in its place is a small, like a sand cherry or a flowering plum or something. So that tree will never have the capacity of say the Douglas fir or the Western red cedar that was there before.
Right.
Yeah, so it's not, yeah, I think that's one thing where we really, maybe there's an opportunity really to think about how can we protect forest fragments. And there's lots of planning theories out there about how to create housing while protecting conservation areas or community forest areas or things like that. And I think as you start getting away from, or even in the urban environment, these forest fragments, even if it's in a right of way or something, by right of way, I mean, in this case, I'm thinking of the kinds of right of ways that are between houses and not necessarily in front of a house. But they can make a big difference if we see them as actually a functional space and not like an abandoned lot or something, if that makes sense.
So, so you were mentioning something about pollinators. How does tree loss impact our pollinators?
Oh yeah, I know. This is such like an interesting I feel like it's so interesting to think about trees as an ecosystem, that the tree itself is an ecosystem too. Not only is it part of an ecosystem, but it is one, and it's supporting all this life, supporting insects and ants, as I observed as a child, and in particular, some of you might be familiar with Doug Tallamy's work. He mostly worked on the east, has worked mostly on the East Coast, looking at pollinators and trees, and actually was looking really at pollinators and specifically caterpillars, butterfly and moth caterpillars and butterfly moths, how they were using different plants. And he found that oaks supported over 400 different kinds of moths and butterflies. And that's just moths and butterflies. That's not bees or any of the, or flies for that, any of the other things that beetles are a huge pollinator. Um, yeah, so we have really important oak trees here. We have the Oregon white oak, the Quercus garryana, and while I don't know if he's specifically studied that, I think we kind of make certain assumptions about if oaks generally are supporting lepidoptera butterflies and moths, that our oaks are probably doing a lot of that too. And it's not surprising if you watch, right, if you have a lot of insects being supported by a tree, you're going to have more birds, amphibians, depending on the environment. But if you're watching an Oregon white oak, at least the ones that I see, they always have birds on them, scrub jays, stellar jays, all sorts of songbirds and things, that hummingbirds and things like that are also using the tree. And they're using the tree because there's not just space and certain kinds of roosting situations, but also because they're insects, that there's food. And for so many birds, it's really critical. Like for these migratory songbirds, they really need those insects in the spring, because that's what helps them get the energy back from their flight, so that they can get ready to do what they flew for, which is to reproduce and nest and raise some little young and see them off. So those insects create like a really important part of that cycle.
So, so can you like just frame the argument for urban trees for us? Just put it in a little box and
Like why we should have trees in the urban environment.
that argument for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think more green, more better, if I put it in the smallest bumper sticker format. But I think we can also see that, like, there's been some articles about this in the last couple of years, but when we have trees, when we have neighborhoods with no trees, more people die of heat-related injury or heat-related consequences. Yeah. And that's a really big deal. I mean, to think that planting trees can make a big difference in somebody's life and their health and their wellness and their ability to thrive, I think that's a really compelling reason for trees in urban environments. I think also that restored, we talked about, I'm a mindfulness teacher, and I also enjoy this experience, really being engaged with forests. And I'm working with one project where there are Pacific chorus frogs. And the Pacific chorus frogs are there because there's a little patch of forest, and you can hear these beautiful frogs in the spring. It's the best sound of spring. And while that wetland, well, so that's the place that you can hear Pacific chorus frogs, and it's an experience that a person should have in person. It's not the same on a recording. It's something that is sort of a sensory experience. And I think when we have these sensory experiences outside, it does reduce our stress, but then it also helps us connect with the actual resource. If we think about it as a resource, the trees, the forests, it's personal, makes it personal. So I think having trees in urban and suburban environments helps us appreciate them and also benefit from them in a way that's even deeper. And then the fact that they are also helping us without, our awareness, really, to help keep everything cooler and contribute in that way to our community health.
And on that, I especially with children, if are you able to hear me? Because it just said
Yep.
my internet's okay. So especially with children, if they spend time in the forest or woods or around nature, they have a greater appreciation, and they will learn to take care of it because of that appreciation, right?
Yeah.
So so what are some of the disconcerting realities of the state of trees right now? I know that we've got some things going on.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that's disconcerting to me is that it is hard to grow trees. Uh, um, I mean, it's hard to grow trees when we don't have rain in the summer. And I think the fact that we have to do a lot of watering to keep trees alive, to get them to establishment, is a little disconcerting. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. I feel like we should, let's keep doing it. But I think it's something to pay attention to, that this is maybe not as quite a renewable resource as we like to think about it. That wild trees can regenerate by seed and all that they still need good conditions to grow. And we can say the same thing about ourselves. We need good conditions to grow. So like kind of our relationship to trees is kind of our relationship to ourselves in a way. And I don't know if that's clear, a little a little woo-woo, but I do think that yeah, you were gonna say something.
No, I agree with you, and I think that that's probably why it's so important to have protection of our existing trees. The ones that the larger trees. Because it is hard to keep these little guys alive, the newer trees. But
Yeah, like we should pause before cutting. I mean, I live a couple doors down from this stump. I look at this stump every day, and it just makes me so sad because there was nothing wrong with the tree. Like, it was a perfectly good tree. And right next to
yeah.
it is a standing dead tree um that just stands there dead. And so it's kind of confusing for me, but anyway, I think what I was kind of where I was going with that is um, it takes so much effort to get a tree to do well. I mean, it takes real
Yeah.
care. It takes watering, it takes adding mulch, which is, organic matter from trees that have passed on, right? So, this full cycle thing. Um, and yet we can have perfectly good trees that, it takes 4 hours to cut the tree down. Um, maybe more if it's really big, but you know, I've seen some of these trees get cut down in 4 hours or less, and it takes, you
It's
know,
sad.
20 years. Yeah. What were you
Yeah,
saying?
I know, and it's sad because I've seen it too. And then anyway, the wildlife is all of a sudden trying to figure out where to go. So what can we do? What's a good action item for us to make a difference that you can kind of leave us with?
Well, I mean, I do think talking to your council member does make a difference. I do think supporting organizations that like Tacoma Tree Foundation that are trying to help bring community together, because those community voices, like all of you together as a community, your voice is more effective than each one of us individually, and it does matter that that we organize. Um, so I think those are probably the two things. And I think like keep planting trees, keep helping other people plant trees, helping people navigate these questions without, I mean, I think one thing too is like, if you're a tree lover, sometimes it's hard to hear people say they want to cut down their tree. And I think it takes a little extra empathy, I guess, to listen to what their concerns are and help them navigate with compassion their experience, because people have like real fears about what might happen. And some of those experiences come from, I mean, some of those feelings come from past experiences. So I guess I'd probably want to, you know, because I feel like I have been talking up the value of trees, which I 100% believe, and also recognize that not everybody has had the benefit of the connection to nature that I have had, or the exposure to information that I've had. And so, yeah, I guess I'd say greet people with compassion, regardless of what they're thinking about doing. Try to stay in relationship with people so that you can help them navigate those difficult choices, and help your council members and local representatives make choices and make good policies that help protect trees on a bigger scale and care for the
So,
ones around you. That's it. Those
so
three.
thank you for saying that about having compassion, empathy, because I'm kind of a tree hugger, and and I think I need to, yeah, I need to be more conscious that there are people that you know have had experiences or fear of trees. But so before we take any questions, which I think we can do here pretty soon, can you just tell us really quick a little bit about Strategic Nature LLC? I'm kind of curious about
Oh
that,
yeah.
and then we'll take questions.
I a few years ago restarted, or mostly started because it was just a little thing a long time ago, but I started a company called Strategic Nature, and it's a consulting firm, and the idea is primarily to just help other people plan and implement environmental projects, mostly around trees, parks, and people, and also to provide educational services, walks and talks, and mindfulness to kind of help people connect with nature, and to provide information. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm really trying to create like a kind of a container that would make it easy for me to work with other people to help other people be successful in what they're trying to accomplish.
Nice. Do you also like help them with their fears of trees?
In theory, yeah, yeah. I don't have any projects like that, but right now.
So I think that we can open it up to questions. So Claudia, you have your hand up.
Well, because we are debating trees, urban trees, so much in Victoria, of course, I have been listening and have been following the debates both in Victoria and Vancouver, especially Vancouver and Victoria. Our provincial government is forcing the municipalities to develop more affordable housing, which means very many of the smaller suburban lots the small houses with big old trees are being removed, and they are building more dense housing, which is needed, but
Mhm.
it is, of course, reduces totally the tree canopy, which is a real difficult thing to think about. what is more important, because it will take 40, 50 years to replace the trees they're taking down. And then is the question which trees to plant, because trees can't move fast enough for climate change.
What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I think about this housing versus trees conversation a lot. And I think I really feel that it shouldn't be an opposing forces kind of thing, that 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 sometimes it's really, I mean, if we kind of going back to that idea, if we think of it from a landscape perspective, we think, how are we going to protect all the trees within a certain area? Well, maybe you're not protecting all the trees in a certain area, but how can we ensure that the, say, the neighborhood has a certain canopy cover? And maybe a tree still needs to be cut to do that, but I think a lot of times the trees don't need to be cut. You know, I mean, it's just like sometimes the design choices that are being made, and the design choices are sometimes the easiest thing to implement rather than the one that is a little bit more complicated. And trees generally make it harder for us to make straight lines. You know, some like trees don't kind of go with the straight lines. They go in all sorts of different directions, circular or like, you know, amoeba shaped.
These are all trees that were planted when the first settlers, the first white settlers came to this area. So many of them are 100, 120 more years old. And
You
they are
know,
down. The
you
other
need to go
that
ahead.
have widened our streets in order to create bike lanes, taking down boulevard trees, left, right, and center. And there are these trade-offs.
Mm.
The only other thing that I wanted to ask you is, we are fighting both the die-off of Western red cedar and Douglas fir because of the lack of summer rain.
Mhm.
And we are fighting all kinds of new pests, some imported, some that simply blossom like the tent caterpillars that denude our boulevard trees. What do we do?
Yeah, I know that is I mean, that's a lot. And we're all facing it. Most cities are experiencing the same things, these challenges between choosing between bicycle, you know, one environmental choice over another, bicycles versus trees, or solar panels versus tree canopy. And you know, the various insects that are happening. And I mean, it's not a very satisfying answer, but I do think planning is an important part of that, and having an urban forest management plan and having a plan that kind of shows where you're implementing priorities, so that maybe on a given street you're not getting all the things that you want. You're not getting the bicycle lanes and the trees and the solar panels and the housing and all the things, but that when you look at the landscape, you're distributing that sort of equally around the city. And and everybody still has a way to benefit from those trees or from those bike lanes, but that we're not putting, say, bike lanes on every single street, or we're not um, we're not cutting every tree, just, you know, regardless of its size and importance.
And on the other hand, other thing is to try to stop further warming.
Well, talk to your representative. Find out who's running housing. You know,
yes, I mean, we have, every developer has to go through a tremendous, many hoops, even for cutting down one tree in Victoria and the other municipalities. But it is this general problem of urbanization, densification, and what we are destroying by it. I mean,
so Deb,
we are well off in the Northwest. Think of people in India.
Oh yeah.
So Deb had a question. Deb, did you want to ask a question?
Well, it's not so much a question. I really just had a comment for Sarah. I have a son who is a arborist in the greater Portland area. And I really want to thank you for bringing up a few different things on this. You know, he works for a tree service, so often they're looked like as the bad guy. But as an arborist, it's oftentimes that he as you said, sometimes there is a tree that has to come down. The health of the tree is not good. The safety of where it's at is not good. And oftentimes he's had to take them down in a park or something and has protesters, but they don't realize that the health of the tree is not good, which you did mention. And the other thing is that many times when he's called out to cut down some trees, he talks to the homeowners and says, you know, there's other options. There's options to wind sail those trees, to go up there and clean them out, get out the debris, make it so the air comes through it better. And that way it minimizes the risk of any tree ever falling over. The other thing that happens is oftentimes they'll say, well, just take out that little one in the middle or something. And they don't know by removing that tree, that can create greater damage than if they were to leave it there. So I really appreciate your comments and all of that. And just so people know, there are arborists out there that look out for the health of the tree and try to keep the tree opposed to take it down when that's the option. So
Yeah,
I want to thank you for
that's
that.
great. Yeah, it's a great point. And I'd love to like amplify it a little bit too and say that like oftentimes arborists are not the ones that are pushing for it. I mean, I've met lots of arborists who, and I'm one too, that that want to help homeowners make a good decision about the tree. And sometimes the homeowners push back a lot. I talked to some, it was a landscape care company that did pruning of smaller trees, and they said we like want like how can we make the argument to homeowners? How can we tell what do we need to tell them so that they won't ask us to do these kinds of prunings that we know are not healthy for the tree, and us saying that's not
Right.
enough. So yeah, it's a tricky
Right.
situation
So
for a lot of arborists and tree care professionals.
yes,
So
yeah,
Marie
but
has
it's nice to have.
Actually, I'm going to let Grace go first because she actually has her hand up.
her hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Sarah, have you heard of the notion that if a lot of trees that are considered male are planted in a huge area, that's what is creating a real problem with pollen allergies, as opposed to planting a male tree near a female tree, near a male tree, near a female tree? I heard this long report many years ago, and the guy said, I live in the country. We never have any issues with pollen allergies because we have both types of trees. I just wanted to know if you've heard that and if it's true and if there's anything being done to create less all pollen trees.
Yeah, that so not all species have male and female trees. Some of them are
Right.
single sex, and so but that is a case that in some plants people try to prefer the male species because it doesn't have fruit, and the fruit is sometimes problematic on sidewalks. And so that's sort of the motivation, is to kind of have a low maintenance sidewalk situation or road situation usually. And there are like recommendations, I guess, for having a low allergen environment. But it's really different for different species. So it's hard to kind of give a one-off kind of this is how to do it. It's really like going and looking at these reports and saying, okay, these trees, we know in this area there's like high asthma. So how do we, try to avoid the trees that are known to be most likely to cause allergen, to produce high VOCs in the form of pollen. So it's more like getting into the weeds of planning again, that urban forest management plan or something like that, in the actual design choices and which trees you choose. Yeah, because there's information out there about which trees produce the most pollen or are the most likely to cause people to react. And so it's possible to do that. It's hard to do that like across the city to avoid all the trees that might cause an allergic reaction or something like that. And people are different and lots of people react differently. So, and also keep in mind that cities tend to be warmer anyway than rural areas with that whole urban heat island effect. So, well, I don't want to depart too much from what research says, but I would assume that if it's hotter in a city, that it's going to produce more VOCs, more things that are going, including pollen, that trees would produce more
Okay.
pollen. But I feel like that's kind of more of a hypothesis than truth. So take that with a
Okay,
grain of salt.
thank Thank you.
Marie, Marie.
Yeah, my question is, given that drought is impacting trees in the West, especially we do see it in the Douglas firs, what are some more drought resistant varieties that we should consider planting? I know last year my husband and I planted incense cedars. I had read that they are considered more drought resistant. So that's what we planted. Anecdotally, I've heard pines do better than firs these days, though I know then they're subject to the pine beetle. So just wondering what types of trees you recommend for planting for being more drought resistant.
Yeah, the drought, yeah, I like to say climate ready because yeah, because all trees pretty much will need some water when they're planted and that sort of thing. And but you can sort of think about well, yes, like you said, incense cedars on that list of climate ready plants in the Pacific Northwest. And then I have had, and I know I'm like, I really want to ask Vivian if she has some recommendations, because she's also a wonderful tree person. And but I've had a great experience with the Vanderwolf limber pine. Yeah, I knew that would get
I'm gonna write it down. What is that?
Vanderwolf limber pine. Go ahead. You want to talk about it?
Well, as I'm also a Pierce County master gardener, so there's been lots of research about like how do we accommodate this climate change role that may be coming up through, our state. So it's like we look at our southern states and what do they have growing there, and so it's just going to be a matter of what is growing down there and what water availability is going to be. So
What was the name of that pine?
When
yeah,
Vanderwolf
it's
pine.
I just made it's Pinus flexus.
Flexilis. Yeah.
It's Pinus flexilis, Vanderwolf. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an awesome plant. I mean, I
Yeah.
planted 3 that they didn't get watered like hardly at all the first year, and it was a drought, and they still were looking great and continued to grow. So I feel like that's a real winner, and I don't see that on lists very often because I think it's a little bit more obscure. It's a little bit more in the trees that arborists and urban foresters talk about rather than trees that are on these bigger lists. But also our Oregon white oak shows up sometimes. Like there's hesitation about it, but it lives in fire regime, a habitat that is associated with a fire regime. So that's another one.
It
And
grows-
like Ian said, sort of looking at what's doing well in other places. And sometimes there's a study with WSU, Washington State University Extension. They're doing a study looking at Douglas fir and Western red cedar in Portland compared to like they're taking seedlings of Western red cedar and Douglas fir from various places, Portland through like Tacoma area and Seattle, I think. And they're planting them around and seeing does genotypes from southern areas do better. So it may not be like changing the actual species that we're looking at, but actually trying to get genotypes or like the genetic diversity from California or Oregon and moving that up manually and seeing if introducing that genetic variety helps with warmer climates.
Right.
How's that?
Exactly. Yes. And I think the pines are a very good drought tolerant species. And also people are scared of trees. I know there was a fear, or people talk about fear of trees, and that is also like something we need to promote more of the professionals that come out and actually maintain and take care of these trees. The bigger trees are doing more in our neighborhoods, and we need to help people figure out how to pay to maintain those trees. So it's because it's not cheap to take care of, but overall the maintenance, it serves the community as well as that homeowner so much. And so there's got to be a way to promote like the maintenance and care. It's like you're taking care of the roof on your house, you take care of, you know, many other things as a homeowner. And, you know, as you broaden that scope, you're also promoting community when you have trees on your property, and can help take care of them. So I know maintenance is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good one.
I just have a comment.
Oh, yeah.
Just in today's newspaper, there's an article about one of the local churches that is actually going to build tiny homes to help relieve our homeless situation. They abut an area where there's trees built, and there's a whole bunch of camps set up just beyond their lot. But once they're going to only have 6, 2 of them will be double occupancy. But the first thing they're going to do after they get people in there, get it secured, is they're going to plant trees and flowers. So I think that's important. It's like, you know, picking up one starfish at a time and throwing it in the sea. It helps a little bit. So
Yeah.
I think every little bit does help. And we've got to cling to that, or else, you know, we'll just start believing that everything's going to hell in a handbasket.
Well, the community should probably thank them, you know? They should get a great big thank you for that, because
Oh, yes. And we just elected a new mayor who's a female. So I'm hopeful.
right.
But our previous mayor was just not at all embracing the fact that he needed to deal with this. Nor was he going about it in a way that would be helpful, other than just blaming the fact that the state legislature wasn't doing anything to help with this, because we're the biggest city in the state, and we inherit a lot of people coming in from outside places who can't afford housing, and then they do become homeless. So it is more than just Anchorage, but we've got to start somewhere. So I'm hopeful that I can report back later that we're making more strides in that.
I think
Cool.
you make a really excellent point too, that that celebrating these singular actions is really important, and that they do add up to something. And I think the important, you know, it's like, what's the alternative, right? Like if we don't act, then it does get worse, right? Like action is the only way forward. Well, I don't know if that's entirely true, but taking actions makes a difference, and I think it's a great point.
Yeah, ask one question before we finish. The problem is not here on the coast, but in the interior of BC, that too many houses in the suburbs of interior cities burned down because of the trees in their yards. They were closer to the forest. We had forest fires that started, and then the embers flew over, and off went the trees close to the houses, and then the houses. So now people are asked to not plant trees close to their homes, nor bushes, because of the fire danger. How is that in Washington State?
Same things are happening here. Same kinds of conversations are happening as far as like removing vegetation around homes, and then we're talking about like the wildland urban interface, and we're just kind of encroaching on it. I was actually looking at the map of Washington the other day of the wildland urban interface, and it looks like a fire map. like it's red and yellow, and of course some of that's just the way the person who made the map depicted it, but you know, it's riskier to be in a forest when it comes to forest fires, and yeah, I don't really have an answer for that one. I think I know Marianne had there you are. Marianne had some comments about that when we were talking before. I don't know if you wanted to share that.
Just so Claudia, you made a good point. People are moving more and more into the urban interface, the wildland urban interface, and that's a problem. But really, if you look at statistics, these homes burn down even if there's nothing around them, if they have a composite roof. It's usually the embers that travel and land on the homes will burn them up, because it's the metal roofs or home hardening is really the only thing that helps when there's a wildfire. I hate to say it, but that is the truth. And also, if people need to invest in like an arborist, like it's been talked about before, and have them look at your trees and mitigate the trees that are close to your home to make sure that the dead is off of it and they're safe. And I had that done where I live, because I do live around trees. And so anyway, I know we've run out of time. I think we're over time, I think, a little bit here.
We are. I just really want to thank Sarah a lot. It just seems like there's a lot of interest and a lot of good conversation, and we thank you. I appreciate it very much. So
Great. Yeah,
yes,
Thank you for having
to
me.
honor everybody's time, we're gonna wrap things up. I just want to remind people that our day of meeting is now going to be the first Thursday of each month. Our topic in September, we won't have a guest speaker, but we will be discussing we are discussing about getting your club involved in the community. So think about what your club has done, or if they haven't done anything in the community, do a little research, and then maybe there's some possibilities that you can share with us after you've done the research. So that's what we're going to talk about in September. I'm also wanting to hear from people ideas for speakers or topics. We don't really have a lot of time to get that feedback now, but I usually send out an email right after each of these meetings, and please respond to that email if you have ideas about topics that you'd like to hear more about, or speakers that you know of. I appreciate that kind of input very much. And thank you so much for those of you who have never come to one of these meetings. Love it. Love that you're here. Hope that you come back. And we hope you have a great evening and a good rest of the summer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Sarah.
Have a wonderful summer.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.